to BLOC and Ballots, co-hosted by Thurgood Marshall Bar Association and Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated Newtown Lambda chapter, and partnering with the UCI Black Law Student Association, the Chapman Black Law Student Association, the Black Young Professionals of Orange County, and of course, the infamous Mu Epsilon Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. We're happy to welcome all of our friends here for an educational event where we will cover all 13 propositions. Please allow me to introduce you to somebody I know very well. Her name is Keisha Dorsey.
But we are very excited that you all have joined us for this very important conversation about the propositions that are on the ballot. We wanted to have this event so we can make it easier for people to be able to participate in the election process. Sometimes when we get to the polls, we're scrambling, trying to remember what the propositions are and doing research, while we're there. Okay. But in your materials, you should have received a sample ballot, so you can fill that out tonight. As we're going through the propositions, you can be able to kind of make an informed decision on which way you want to vote. We're going to be giving you, at least initially, a very objective viewpoint of each of the propositions, and we're really excited for tonight. So thank you to all of our partnering organizations, and we're going to dive back in. I'm going to turn it back over to Charles.
My name is Anthony McDonald. I represent the Newtown Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated in Orange County. And I'd like to briefly summarize and discuss for you the provisions of Proposition 14 and how it would benefit the citizens of Orange County, as well as any reservations that some individuals may have. Proposition 14 is titled essentially a bond initiative which would fund additional research for regenerative treatment, so to speak, through stem cell research. What Proposition 14 does, it is a bond initiative in which it is proposed that the people of California receive, through investments in general obligation bonds, up to $5.5 billion for research and development of stem cell research in order to be able to successfully create these regenerative treatment modalities for a variety of debilitating medical conditions. They include Alzheimer's and dementia, heart disease, renal and kidney failure, and a variety of other neurological difficulties. It follows up to a prior bond initiative which was passed in 2004, through which California raised, through general obligation bonds, $3.1 million, a little more than $3 billion, which funded the initial phase of research and development for some of these very same conditions. During the last 16 years, researchers, primarily through hospitals and the University of California system, ultimately discovered up to more than 2,900 different leads that provided areas of opportunity for additional research to be done. And unfortunately, after the last 16 years, there's not enough money to continue this. Most of the money that was raised from the initial ballot initiative has been since exhausted. So that's the reason that the initiative is being requested. Of the $5.5 billion, $1.5 billion is specifically earmarked for research and development for these conditions, but particularly it's earmarked for that research to be done by the California State University as well as the California Community Colleges. In addition, $540 billion would be allocated or would be distributed in the form of the general obligation bonds every year for the next 15 years. The good of the one issue one drawback that was being mentioned by some of the people who were against the initiative is that the debt service on the bonds would be paid by taxpayers or would have some kind of residual effect impacting the general fund of California. It isn't the case. The debt service will be funded from the sale of the bonds, which will be purchased by investors for the tax benefits and so forth. And only after the 15 years, beginning in 2026, the debt service will be funded from the actual money that was, I would say, probably money that's been since that will be recaptured by the general fund. These conditions, which I mentioned earlier, ultimately, these conditions and the benefits of the proposition to raise these funds would impact all Californians. All Californians. For one thing, over the course of the last 20 years, California's population has grown by 35 to 40%. And of that population, approximately 1/3 of Orange County's population is comprised of people of color. Many of us, either in our families or people we know, have people who have members who are afflicted with these various conditions, and the benefits of raising the funds would, according to the advocates for the initiative, they would dramatically increase the abilities of hospitals, research institutions to be able to find not just palliative care to try to aid and comfort the people suffering from these conditions, but also in addition to that, also to lead to a potential cure. And that would affect virtually every Californian. And it's not just the Californians who are afflicted by these conditions, but also it's important to remember the members of families and the caregivers. Up through 2040, federal as well as state researchers, particularly with California's Board of Public Health, have estimated that the caregiving costs and medical costs alone for not treating this, particularly in communities of people of color, would exceed some $6 trillion, $1 trillion of which would be in California. And so what Californians would have to do when looking at this ballot initiative would have to weigh the risk as well as the utility of, number one, the utility of being able to provide this care and to continue the research that's done to be able to help Californians and their families, versus not being able to raise money right now, and the risk of not taking care of current health challenges that are brought on by COVID-19 and so forth. Anyhow, that's my summary for Proposition 14. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good evening. Greetings. My name is John Matthews. I am a lawyer at the Justice Collaborative, and I am representing Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, New Tau Lambda chapter. We're talking about Proposition 15. Prop 15 is a commercial property tax initiative. To understand this proposition, I'd like to go back in time. Do you remember 1978? I don't. I was born in 1981, so I was -3. But let me take you back there. California's home prices and taxes were soaring, so voters passed Prop 13. Properties used to be taxed based on their current home price. If a house's value doubled, so did its taxes. So the voters stopped that. Under Prop 13, properties are taxed under their original purchase price. The longer you stay in your home, the larger the tax break. That also applies to commercial properties. That leads to Prop 15, which would lead to changes to Prop 13. Prop 15 would be the biggest change to California's tax system in a generation. Prop 15 is also known as split roll. Prop 15 splits homes from commercial properties. So it puts them in different tax rolls and with different tax consequences. The ballot initiative would make an exemption or exception for properties whose business owners have $3 million or less in holdings in California. These properties would continue to be taxed based on their purchase prices, not current market rates. I'd like to go through pros and cons. So Ben Grief, who's campaign director of Evolve California, he said, quote, Chevron is getting the same deal as grandma. That doesn't make any sense. So billions of dollars in local government and school revenues have been lost over the years due to Prop 13, and this new measure could finally guarantee some much needed funding, supporters say. California's school spending lags behind the majority of states, and Prop 15 could help bring a boost for students. Proponents also say that it only affects a small group of wealthier landlords. It will help close a tax loophole that has long been used to benefit corporations at local communities' expense. Now, Rob Lapsley, president of the California Business Roundtable, says, we're going to have the largest tax increase in California history at exactly the wrong time. And our economy can't afford it. So opponents say Prop 15 would burden commercial property renters, consumers, and business owners alike, even though developers who own millions in property would stand to directly lose the most from this proposition. They could very well pass on the tax burden by raising rents for tenants. And although agricultural land is exempt from new tax heights, farm fixtures such as barns, dairies, fruit trees, and more, those aren't exempt, which agricultural advocates say leaves farmers vulnerable. The communities that are impacted, so this would increase funding for K-12 public schools, community colleges, and local governments by requiring that commercial and industrial real property be taxed based on current market value instead of purchase price. It's estimated that $7.5 to $12 billion will be generated in a year, but this would also for sure impact businesses, higher taxes based on market rates, that the business community say that would be passed on to small businesses for sure. Just to give you a sense of who's supporting. So some officials that are supporting are Senator Kamala Harris, Representative Karen Bass. Some officials that are opposing are Vince Vaughn, he's an assembly member, and Ted Gaines on the California State Board of Equalization. Some organizations that are supporting are ACLU, Mi Familia Vota, League of Women Voters, and Teachers Associations. Organizations opposing: California Chamber of Commerce, California Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, California Black Chamber of Commerce, California Restaurants Association. So in sum, it passed, nothing changes for homeowners, small businesses, and farmers. Lots of commercial landowners will be stripped of Prop 13 protections. If you vote yes, you want commercial properties to be taxed based on today's mostly higher market prices. If you vote no, you want to keep things the way they are. Thanks.
My name is Sydney Martin. I am representing UC Irvine Black Law Students Association, and I'm also a Thurgood Marshall ambassador for this past school year. And I'm super excited to present to y'all on Prop 16. So Prop 16 is the repeal Prop 209 Affirmative Action Amendment. So this prop is also called Allow Diversity as a Factor in Public Employment, Education, and Contracting Decisions. So Prop 16 will repeal Prop 209, which was passed in 1996, and allow, not require, government and public institutions to grant preferential treatment to persons on the basis of race, gender, color, ethnicity, and national origin in public employment, public education, and public contracting. So currently, right now, government entities and public institutions, they're not allowed to consider a person's race or gender, ethnicity, or origin when making admissions or hiring decisions. So if Prop 16 passes, then that barrier is eliminated. So Prop 16 would benefit women and minorities across the state because it would give a holistic view of applications, right? When these applications are sent to admissions offices at college campuses or to public contracting offices in the government and also public employment agencies as well. So the fiscal impact, this is pretty important because I think a lot of people are confused about this. So on its face, Prop 16 would not impact any institutions because it does not require institutions to change their hiring and admissions policies, right? So if Prop 16 passes, a employment office or a college can choose whether or not they want to use race or gender in their admissions and application process, right? However, some fiscal effects could happen if these state and local entities were to implement policies or programs that would consider race, sex, ethnicity, etc., right? However, these are uncertain because, like I said, this is not a requirement for institutions to enact affirmative action. So that's your fiscal impact for Prop 16. So I'm going to the pros. So those in favor of Prop 16 would say that it would dismantle structural sexism and structural racism within the hiring and education process. It would also make for a comprehensive application review. So employers and admissions already look at everything from an applicant, right? They look at your socioeconomic status and your background. And so people argue that they should look at race of the student as well, or prospective employee as well, right? It would also, people argue that it would also improve the wage gap. And then the last point that people in favor of Prop 16 say is that it would prevent women and people of color who own small businesses from losing to bigger, wealthier companies for government contracts. And we know these bigger, wealthier companies are usually headed by white men, right? So currently these companies are becoming richer by monopolizing on these contracts, and businesses owned by women and people of color lose over $1.1 billion per year due to Prop 209. Thus, Prop 16 would invest wealth back into minority communities. So those are the pros. Those are what people who argue in favor of Prop 16 say. And so I'm gonna move to the cons. So those who argue against Prop 16 say that it would unfairly prioritize race rather than socioeconomic status in admissions and hiring decisions. So for example, in the booklet that you just got in the mail about the different props, the argument against Prop 16 had this example when they were arguing against. They said the University of California will again be free to give a wealthy lawyer's son, who's Black, a preference for admission over a farm worker's daughter simply because he is from an underrepresented group. However, please note that college campuses, they're not allowed by law to use racial quotas to fill their seats. So I just wanted to give that as a little bit of a caveat. Next, they argue that it legalizes racial discrimination against white and non-Black, non-Latinx minorities, such as Asian Americans. Which goes into this equality argument. By allowing affirmative action, you are favoring Black and Latinx students and prospective employees rather than Asian American and white prospective employees and students. And lastly, an argument against Prop 16 is that it could increase taxes when it comes to governmental contracting, right? Because contracts enacted after Prop 16 are approximately 5% lower. So Prop 209 made contracts become cheaper, which means less taxes go to these contracts. And before Prop 209, the contracts that considered applicants' race, sex, or ethnicity were more expensive than the ones now. So they're saying that it could increase taxes. And so that's what I have for you with your pros, cons of Prop 16 and affirmative action. Thank you for allowing me to present on this prop. Thank you again for inviting me. I really appreciate y'all. And I hope I didn't talk too fast. Y'all are cool. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Clint Jones, and I am a student at Chapman Law, and I am representing Chapman BLOC, Black Law Students Association. I will be representing on Proposition 17, also known as Free the Vote. This proposition gives convicted felons who have been released from prison but are still on parole the right to vote. Currently, California disqualifies members who have been released from prison but are still on parole from voting. What a yes vote does, it gives them their right to vote back. What a no vote does is keeps it exactly the same as it is now. Parole refers to the criminal offenders who are conditionally released from prison to serve the remaining portion of their sentence in the community. They have conditions for their release of imprisonment, which may include not having interaction with other felons, from interaction with known gang members, refraining from the use of drugs, not breaking any other laws, maintaining employment, regular check-ins with their parole officer. The question becomes, is parole part of a felon's punishment or rehabilitation? Currently, California, currently 19 states allow people who have felonies and who are on parole to vote. 28 states do not allow people that are on parole to vote. 8 states disqualify people who are on probation. And 7 states bar people who have been convicted of a felony and have been released from prison from ever regaining the right to vote. Some of the supporters for this proposition include Senator Kamala Harris, several state senators, and California Secretary of State, Alex Padilla. And that's all I have for you guys today.
So my name is Melissa St. Prue. I am the Vice President of YBPOC, Young Black Professionals of Orange County. You can check us out at ybpoc.org if you'd like to get more information about who we are and what we do. And I am going to be talking about Prop 18, which is primary voting for 17-year-olds. So Prop 18 is a ballot measure that will appear on the ballot this November. If passed, it will allow 17-year-olds to vote in primary and special elections if they are to turn 18 by the subsequent general election. So basically what that means is if there is a young adult or a 17-year-old who is going to be turning 18 before November 3rd, they would have been allowed to vote in the primary election that was held earlier this year. So if you had voted yes, this means that you support allowing 17-year-olds who will be 18 by the time the general election is held to vote in the primary or any special election. And then if you vote no, that means you oppose this amendment and you pretty much would like things to stay the same. So what supporters are saying is that if you were to vote yes, this would allow 17 and 18-year-olds to participate in the full election cycle, rather than allowing them to only participate in a general election. This could boost the number of young adults who actually vote. 17 and 18-year-olds are also old enough to work and pay taxes. So those who support this amendment also think it would be just for them to be able to have the right to vote as well. And it also encourages young people to be involved in lifelong voting. Some of the opponents are saying that 17-year-olds are considered minors still, and they are highly influenced by their parents and teachers and peers. They also have not fully developed, their brains have not fully developed, and so they might not be able to make the best decision for them. And the opposers are also saying that there are plenty of avenues for young adults who are interested but not of age to get involved in the political process, such as working campaigns or volunteering, helping candidates, get people to vote and educating themselves for when they are old enough to vote. So just to give a couple of examples here, so my name is Melissa. If I were a 17-year-old and this measure had passed, say my birthday is today, October 1st, and the election is November 3rd, I would have been allowed to vote earlier this year in the primary. If we continue the way we are now, which is okay, and we decide that we don't want to go forward with this proposition, I would not be able to get the opportunity to vote in the primary election, which means, I wouldn't be able to decide whether I could vote for Bernie Sanders or Warren or Kanye West. That was a joke. But basically the options I have are already selected for me, right? So I only have what's available during the general election. I hope that was clear. That's pretty much Prop 18.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alicia Crooks, and I'm the president of Young Black Professionals of Orange County. I am presenting Proposition 19, the Portable Property Tax Break. It also has a longer extended name, Exemptions and Revenue for Wildlife Agencies and Counties Amendment. So basically, this proposition would allow the older couple to buy a new home anywhere in the state and retain a relatively low property tax. Under this current law, a Californian who inherits a Malibu estate can rent it out on Airbnb, yet still pay the same property tax that was locked in at their parents' rate back whenever that was. Under this new proposition, if an adult inherits that particular estate for an artificially low property tax bill, they would actually have to pay the current tax prices for that property. So this particular proposition will give Californians 55 or older a big property tax break when buying a new home. To fund that new tax break, it will curtail a separate tax break Californians may receive on homes inherited from their parents and grandparents. This will generate new revenue from closing the inheritance tax break, and it could generate billions for schools, local governments, and the state, especially for firefighters. So a yes vote in support would support seniors keeping their lower property taxes when they move. This will incentivize seniors stuck in oversized homes to downsize. This will free up inventory in the state's ridiculously expensive housing market. And also, this will create a budget boost to local governments and state firefighters. A no vote opposes this constitutional amendment, therefore continuing to allow eligible homeowners to transfer their tax assessments within counties to the homes of equal or lesser market value. It will still keep the number of times a person over 55 years or older with severe disabilities from transferring their tax assessments to one, and allow the tax assessments on inherited homes, including those not used as principal residences, to be transferred from parent to child or grandparent to grandchild. So we'll keep the same thing going if you oppose this vote. Supporters and the communities impacted, the older community, anyone that's 55 or older, will be impacted by this if we were to vote yes. This will again generate hundreds of millions in tax revenue. It will close the inheritance tax break gap and provide a budget boost to the local government, firefighters, especially in a time where we're dealing with the state fires that are going on and the coronavirus pandemic that has impacted a lot of state funding. Opponents of this particular proposition, they're saying that this is for realtors to get an incentive to boost their commission. Also, adult children should have the right to do whatever they want with the property that they inherit without facing a crushing tax burden. On the supporting side, Governor Gavin Newsom is supporting this particular bill. The Democratic Party, the California Black Chamber of Commerce, the California NAACP State Conference, California Asian Chamber of Commerce, and the California Association of Realtors. So those are all the supporters of this bill. Alrighty.
Good evening. I'm Nathan Deal, representing Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, New Tau Lambda chapter, the OC Alphas. And I'll be reviewing Proposition 20. And Proposition 20 restricts parole for certain offenses that would be considered nonviolent, authorizes certain offenses that are considered felonies, right, to be treated only as misdemeanors. And so, in general, you know it as the DNA control or DNA collection. But also within this, those that are for this proposition would say that it closes a loophole to the law that allows convicted child molesters, felons, predators, other folks that are convicted of violent crimes to be released from prison early. And then that also allows law enforcement to collect DNA from these individuals. So those that are forward said, hey, this will close a loophole for those that are really bad people. And those that are con or against it are saying, hey, this is a spending scam for California in regards to increasing and expanding law enforcement in regards to, for those who are not considered serious or violent crimes, can have extended and longer sentences. They cannot be released from prison early, and it will eliminate funding to rehabilitation, mental health, schools, and homeless programs. And so a yes vote means for this measure that people who commit certain crimes like petty theft or repeat shoplifter can be considered a felon. Now, once you be considered a felon for such a petty nonviolent crime, you don't get parole. What can happen to you is you'll be given the title as a felon, and now the law enforcement can collect your DNA. And so a no vote will pretty much keep everything where it is. So penalties for people who commit certain theft-related crimes would not be increased, right? It'll keep it the same. There will be no change to the state's process for releasing certain inmates from prison early. Law enforcement would continue to only be required to collect DNA for convicted felons who are like sex offenders or arsonists. So in a nutshell, it restricts parole for nonviolent crimes, and it will expand sentencing for those nonviolent crimes, increase and expand DNA collection for those that commit nonviolent crimes, and it also will expand law enforcement and create a huge fiscal impact to tens of millions of dollars of funding that would go towards law enforcement, and then eliminate that funds or cut those funds from other programs regarding mental health, homelessness, and schools. And that's Proposition 20.
We're at Proposition 21. My name is Denise Carter. I'm a board member of the Thurgood Marshall Bar Association. We are Orange County's Black Bar. I've got Proposition 21, which is rent control. This is one of the easier propositions to get through and read and understand. So the decision as to whether or not you're going to vote yes or no is really based upon your beliefs and whether or not you think the proposition is going to do what the people that have written it aim for it to do. The idea behind this proposition, its title is expanding local government's authority to enact rent control on residential properties. And that's exactly what it is. It's pretty straightforward. The idea is that it expands the ability of local governments to enact rent control on additional properties that were not able to be rent controlled in the past. It amends state law to establish rent control on residential properties that are over 15 years old. It allows rent increases on rent controlled properties of up to 15% over 3 years for new tenants. Now, this is a different situation. Under the current law, when a tenant moves out and a new tenant moves in, landlords can increase the property rent up to the new market rate. Under the new proposition, that's not the case. Landlords will only be able to raise the rent 15% over a 3-year period. It does exempt people who own no more than 2 properties from this new rent control. Here's a potential con. Cities and states indicate that they may lose tens of millions of dollars in taxes because these rental properties will be worth less and they'll be paying less in taxes. The issue here is the drafters of the bill believe that it will address the affordability issues here in California that are causing so much of the homelessness. The cons to this, the folks that don't believe in this concept, say that it's not at all addressing the housing shortage. That is true, and that this particular proposition will actually make things worse by making it harder for builders to actually want to build new property. The supporters of this amendment proposition are Bernie Sanders and Maxine Waters, Dolores Huerta, who is with the United Farm Workers Organization, the ACLU, and the National Lawyers Guild of Los Angeles. The opponents are Gavin Newsom, the California NAACP Conference, and the California Senior Advocates League. So again, this is actually a pretty easy one to understand. And in reality, the actual text of the proposition itself is only 7 pages long. So it's not difficult to go ahead and read in the entirety and see what your thoughts are. The issue is whether or not you believe that rent control is actually going to address some of these issues that have caused the housing shortage and have caused the the homelessness issue, or whether you believe that it'll just make it worse. So those are the pros and cons of this one.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I am KL Newhouse with the Marvelous Mu Epsilon Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Incorporated, and I will be speaking with you about Proposition 22. As you see, the short title is App-Based Driver. The actual ballot title is the exempts app-based transportation and delivery companies from providing employee benefits to certain drivers initiative statute. So essentially, if some of you can harken back to way back in 2019 when the world looked different, in 2019 September, there was a California Assembly AB 5, which essentially pulled out the designation between independent contractors and employees by definition and designation in the state of California. What this particular proposition proposes to do is essentially pluck out app-based drivers from AB 5 and separate them into their own specific category. So if you vote yes, it would essentially mean that you support the ballot initiative to define app-based transportation, or commonly known as rideshare, and delivery drivers as independent contractors, and adopt labor and wage policies that would be very specific to those app-based drivers as independent contractors. So yes, you support the initiative to define app-based drivers as independent contractors. No means you, in an opposing vote, that the ballot initiative essentially would mean that app-based drivers would fall under Assembly Bill 5, so AB 5 in 2019, which essentially decided app-based drivers would be employees or independent contractors, depending upon other specificity in the bill. The supporters of the bill are Lyft, Uber, Instacart, and again, the number of individuals supporting the bill fall within the same purview. They have contributed well into the ballot initiative, $184 million in support of this ballot initiative. Those opposing 22 no include the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the SEIU UHW West, another local union, Service Employees International Union, United Food and Commercial Workers Local 770, and United Food and Commercial Workers Western States Issues of the Pacific. So essentially, labor unions and union affiliated committees oppose 22. So what the ballot measure would change, it has essentially little impact on the fiscal up or down or adverse or positive to the state's budget. What it does do is increase the profits of rideshare companies. So essentially, although it reads that the drivers who average, they have some very specific things about how they would be looked upon as app-based drivers to pull them out from, again, AB 5, which defined employees and independent contractors. So the background is app-based drivers and delivery companies would allow customers to hire ride orders through the phone app as the same. Drivers could work part-time. Drivers could deliver, rideshare companies hire independent contractors still. And then they say that the rideshare and delivery companies would then must hire drivers as employees. So for that proposal, it gives drivers certain benefits, because if you're going to redefine them as a special category, then the benefits would be earning minimum wage, some particular health insurance stipend that's undefined if you work 15 hours a week, pay for costs when a driver gets hurt on the job, so that's workers' compensation essentially, rest policy, so there has to be similar to a number of Teamsters policies where there has to be a 12-hour rest, 24-hour off period of time. And then there will be other specific requirements. The fiscal effect, again, is rideshare and delivery drivers would become employees or independent contractors is still being decided in the courts if Prop 22 does not pass. So essentially, if you oppose it, you're siding with the unions. If you support it, you're siding with the rideshare app companies and technology committees that support this proposition. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Archer. I am a member of Mu Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Mu Epsilon Omega chapter, and I will be talking to you about Proposition 23, which is also known as the Kidney Dialysis Clinic Requirements Initiative. What's important about Prop 23 is that the number of people with kidney failures who require dialysis treatment continues to grow, with around 80,000 Californians depending on it. Prop 23 requires that to have a minimum of at least one licensed physician present at the clinic while patients are being treated, reporting data on dialysis related information to the state health department and the National Healthcare Safety Network. It also requires the principal officer of the clinic to certify under penalty of perjury that he or she is satisfied after reviewing the submitted report is accurate and complete. Also, to provide a written notice to the state health department and obtain consent from the state health department before closing a chronic dialysis clinic. And it also focuses on chronic dialysis clinics cannot discriminate with respect to offering or providing care, nor refuse to offer or to provide care on the basis on who's responsible for paying for the patient's treatment. A yes vote means that you support the chronic dialysis clinics. The chronic dialysis clinics would require the doctor to have require a doctor to be on site during all patient treatment hours. A yes vote will also be supporting the reporting of the data on dialysis related information, obtained consent from the state health department before closing a clinic, and does not discriminate against the patient based on the source of payment for care. No vote for this measure means that you oppose the chronic dialysis clinics would not be required to have a doctor on site during all patient treatment hours. You also oppose having the reporting data on dialysis related infections, obtain consent from the state health department before closing a clinic, and also on discriminating against patients based on their source of payment for care. The arguments. The pros for this prop, they combat poor hygiene in dialysis clinics by requiring infection reporting, improve staffing, including requiring a doctor in clinics during treatment. It stops discrimination based on patients' insurance, and it applies improvements to all clinics, whether in wealthy neighborhoods or in the poor, rural, Black or brown communities. The supporters also would state that kidney patients deserve better treatment when they receive from dialysis clinics. The removal of blood during a dialysis treatment puts a strain on the body, and it leaves them vulnerable to a medical crisis. Having a licensed physician on site at all times during an emergency would allow the physician to respond immediately. The cons would say that Prop 23 would force many community dialysis clinics to shut down, which would be threatening the lives of 80,000 Californians patients who need dialysis to survive. Prop 23 would also increase healthcare costs by hundreds of millions annually and make the doctor shortage in ERs overcrowding worse. The opponents would also state that the clinics already report infection data to the federal government, and that they have the necessary medical staff to keep patients safe, including a medical director. Also, and adding physicians around the clock would increase the clinic costs, pushing them to reduce hours or possibly close. The people most affected would be those individuals who are receiving the dialysis treatment. So the cost of having a doctor on site would affect those individuals depending on their finances. Most of the chronic dialysis clinics operate under a government entity that owns and / operates multiple CDCs. So the governing entity could spread costs throughout multiple locations. The least affected would mean that it's going to simply stay the same how it is now, but it will have a lower profit. So from governing entities, the higher cost is due to the measure could reduce their profits, but they can continue to operate at current levels without closing the clinics. The supporters of this prop are the Service Employees International Union, United Healthcare Workers, the California Labor Federation, and the California Democratic Party. Those who are against it are DaVita, Fresenius Medical Care, the California Medical Association, and the California State Conference NAACP. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm back again. Denise Carter, once again, Thurgood Marshall Bar Association. So whereas 21 was pretty straightforward, 24 is extraordinarily complicated. I'm going to try and parse out some of it for you, and then I've got a quote that I think, for me at least, exemplifies it. So Prop 24 expands or amends the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018. So in 2018, consumers voted in that other act. This new idea here is to support the initiative. This proposition supports the initiative to expand California data privacy laws, including provisions to allow consumers to direct businesses not to share their personal information. That's the start of it. Another big piece of this is it actually creates a new organization. It creates the California Privacy Protection Agency, which is going to be an oversight agency to ensure that these things actually come to fruition. So voting yes is a support for this initiative. Voting no is opposing this ballot initiative to expand the consumer data privacy. Let's go into some of the details here. What it does specifically is to remove the ability of businesses to fix violations before they are penalized for those violations. The idea is that if they're penalized, then they are going to use some of those funds to pay for the cost of implementing this proposition. The businesses must not share consumer information upon the request of the consumer not to have that information shared. They must provide consumers with an opt-out option to prevent sensitive information being disclosed. Sensitive information includes precise geolocation, race, ethnicity, religion, genetic data, sexual orientation, and health information. They also must get parental permission for any consumers that are 13 or younger. They have to correct inaccurate personal information upon request, and also obtain permission to collect data from anyone under the age of 16. The cost to run this agency is anticipated to be $10 million. There's also increased costs in the millions for just the increased court and Department of Justice workloads that may come up from trying to implement all these rules. This initiative was placed on the ballot by one individual, a real estate developer named Alistair McTaggart, and it's supported by the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees Union. It's also supported by the NAACP State Conference, but it's opposed by Dolores Huerta, who's United Farm Workers Organization, the California Judges Union, the ACLU, Color of Change, and the League of Women Voters. The con to this, the folks that are against it say that it's nothing more than a privacy poll tax. The idea here being that if you don't pay to have these additional privacy laws in place, privacy rules in place, that you are going to be relegated to much slower speeds and being in what the language of the con says is actually a ghetto. It also does not stop digital redlining, which allows lenders to use your race data or information upon your neighborhood's race makeup to provide higher rates or refusing to lend to folks. Here is a quote that I think is really interesting. It comes from the San Francisco editorial board. Again, this is such a complicated initiative, the actual text of the bill is 50 pages. If Proposition 24 were as restrictive and airtight as advertised, wouldn't those exploiting our private information be pouring money into defeating it? But they're not. Their silence is deafening. So one more thing I want to say with respect to this is the large organizations who are allegedly being targeted about the privacy information, Google, Facebook, and the like, were in the room when this information was crafted. They have helped to craft the language of this proposition. So something else to bear in mind. Once more, this is one you probably want to take a look at on your own. This gives a good overview, but it's one of the more complicated matters. There's a lot of detail here. It's very lengthy and it's very esoteric. So please take a look at your convenience as well.
I am discussing Proposition 25, which is abolishing cash bail. On your ballots, it will read as the referendum on law that replaced money bail with system based on public safety and flight risk. So some of you may be asking yourselves, why is this particular proposition on the ballot? Because you may have heard in 2018 that Governor Brown already had signed this particular law into law. And immediately it was opposed by the bail bonds industry. And so there was a referendum. And so now we are voting to determine whether or not cash bail will officially be abolished in the state of California or not. The yes vote on Proposition 25 essentially would mean that we would end cash bail in California and we would replace it with an algorithm. And so I think the fact that there's an algorithm is why there is some opposition to this particular piece of, for this particular proposition, even by groups that you might think would want to agree or support it. So essentially, the proponents of Proposition 25 indicate that the system is inherently flawed, that it's unfair, that it's racist, that it's unjust, that it results in essentially two systems of justice, system of justice for those who are poor, and then a system of justice for those who do not have resources. And the reason why that's a problem is because, studies show that when an individual is released pre-trial, they tend to have better outcomes for their cases, whether they go to trial or whether they decide to take an offer. If someone's out of custody prior to, pre-trial, then their attorney can work with them to get mitigating information, to have a plea that's more favorable to them. And of course, if the individual decides that they want to go to trial, then you have the opportunity to work more closely with your client to prepare for their defense. And so that's pretty much the argument that the proponents of the system, of Proposition 25 are arguing. Opponents of Proposition 25 essentially say that while they agree that the cash bail system currently as it exists is fundamentally flawed, we shouldn't replace it with an alternative that may be no better or potentially worse. And so they argue that, all algorithms are great and they're useful for things like, selling you a toaster, pitching you a song, but they're not necessarily good in terms of determining, the individual's, whether or not a particular individual is a flight risk or whether they're going to be a harm to society. And so opponents say that with this algorithm, which we're not even clear exactly what's going to be considered in the algorithm, you essentially have a system currently like the one we have now, where people who are making decisions on whether or not someone should be released pre-trial are unable to recognize the humanity of the individual or be able to look at their particular case individually instead of using a blanket prescription in determining whether or not they're a flight risk or whether they are going to be a danger to the public. And so, you know, opponents of Proposition 25 also indicate that it could actually lead to more people of color being held for trial at disproportionate rates. And I know that this is not the time for us to talk about our opinions on it, so I will not, but I will say that I have a very strong opinion about this, and I currently practice as a criminal defense attorney, and so I'm willing to talk about that during the question and answer period. Who is for this particular proposition? The Service Employees International Union, the California Democratic Party, the California Medical Association, Governor Gavin Newsom, and Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon. The individuals who are against it is the California State Conference of the NAACP, the California Peace Officers Association, the California Bail Agents Association, and the Human Rights Watch. As far as the population that would be greatly impacted by Proposition 25 if it were to be passed is obviously individuals who are accused of crimes. And just to be very clear, it only applies to individuals who are accused of crimes in the state system. So if you're accused of a federal crime in California, this particular proposition would not apply to you.
All right. Listen, we did a tremendous job. Thank you, guys. Let me do this real quick. I want to celebrate and acknowledge all of our presenters, and I'm going to pin them one at a time. There is Brother John Matthews. Y'all give it up for John Matthews. Give it up for Melissa Saint. I can't get her last name, but it surely looks like it sounds good. Alicia Crooks. But y'all go ahead and shout her out. Brother Clint Jones, looking sharp with the good background. Thank you so much. Brother Anthony McDonald gave a tremendous presentation we've got Dr. Newhouse of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Thank you so much. Elizabeth Archer, y'all give it up for her. She did a tremendous job. Thank you so much. Nathan Deal of Alpha Alpha Fraternity Incorporated continues to do a tremendous job there. Let's give it up for Denise Carter and the Thurgood Marshall Bar Association. Give it up for Keisha Dorsey. It's spelled K-E-S-H-I-A. For those of you who are giving shouts out, we want to make sure that you're clear. There's a couple of things that I think are really important here. One of them is, this was an introduction. Some of you have already made your decision and are prepared to vote, but there are others who are not. Please do your research. We're going to do our best to keep this content in front of you, but the onus of understanding is still on the viewer, right? We don't proclaim to be able to think for you. We cannot go to the polls for you. What we try to do is offer some content to simplify the voting process and to give us incentive to not wait until you get to the booth and sit up there and have to read through all that rhetoric to have some sense of what the actual propositions mean. The other part of the vote is for candidates. I believe that there's enough content there to spin your head. We certainly don't want to have that here. And so thank you guys for doing that. I want to turn it over to Keisha for any last comments as we prepare to end.
I just wanted to say, it's very, very, very important to vote. We assume that since you joined our webinar that you plan on voting, but if you have family, friends who are not inclined to participate in the election process, we encourage you to encourage them to do so. This is a very important election. All elections are important. This is a very, very important election. And Thurgood Marshall, on our website, we have information regarding the voting process for those who may be confused. I know that there was some confusion about people have asked questions or sent to us questions asking, like, is it better to mail in your ballot? Is it better to vote on the day of? And things of that. Is my ballot, is this a whole fraud, right? After listening to the presidential debate on Tuesday, right? We don't know if this is actually a fraudulent process. So if you want more information about that, you can go onto Thurgood Marshall's homepage, and we have more information about the voting process. But thank you all for coming. And as I said at the beginning, our children are the future. Please vote wisely.
This is a statement from our communities to us that they expect that we as leaders will offer content in a communal, collective, collaborative way that allows people to feel enriched overall. And so let's not let this be the last time that we do something together.